Hi, my name is Guy Lawrence and thanks for tuning into my podcast today. If you're enjoying these conversations and you want to check out more of this transformational work, be sure to come back to guylawrence.com.au and join me as we go further down the rabbit hole. Enjoy the show. Laurie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Guy. I'm so excited to be here.
I have been delving into your work a lot over the last few days, and I'm always fascinated by what people have to say because it's different every time. But if you were at an intimate dinner party right now and you sat next to a stranger and they got talking to you and they asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
I'll tell you what I said to David Hamilton, a beautiful Hay House author that many of your people will know. I said to him, go deep or go home. That's what I do. Go deep or go home. It really wasn't an answer to your question. However, it's an entree. I'm really trying to help people reclaim the beauty of their divine hearts and to empower themselves with the heart, brain, body connection, where we are empowered in ourselves to have the answers that we need in connection with the divine. And I do that through healing the worst of traumas, because if people who experience the worst of trauma can be resilient, then who are we not to be?
Exactly. Now, I've got to ask you, Laurie, that what is the typical response? Because from my experience, and I mentioned on the podcast before, if you had said the word divine, if you had said the word connecting to your heart, I would have run a mile as a Welshman, right? So, but now I've, passionately lived this way and been through so many processes, it's just, I don't even think about it anymore. Mm-hmm. But what kind of responses do you get normally?
Well, the biggest work I've ever done in my life is to prepare myself to be fully present to the people I met in Rwanda when I started my humanitarian work there in 2007. And having been a trauma healing professional for many years, I had my tools, I have my PhD, I have my books, but I knew that the answer was really going fully inside myself to see, could I be fully present to the worst of human tragedies? Meaning, could I open my heart to myself and the other person? And the second piece to that is, I've always been in search of, is love and the right resources the answer to everything? The bookmark is, I believe my job is to make other people feel safe in my presence and for me to allow them to feel safe. And then we share as equals. So I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything. I don't language myself. I don't necessarily say divine and heart right off the bat. I go slowly. But what I do know over my lifetime and the past 16 years is, in every situation I've ever been in, love and the right resources is the answer. And I think now, in the tremendous challenges that our world is seeing right now, like there's no way out. We've all been sent to our rooms to get quiet enough till we get it. And until everyone's equal and everyone has access to healthcare and safety and a sustainable living and all of that, never in our wildest dreams has the stage been set so much as it is now. And I know I'm kind of going around, but there's no simple answers to those questions.
No, not at all. But I'm sure we'll keep diving in, because there's so many things that have already triggered, which direct, because you mentioned Rwanda in 2007. And I'm super keen to dive into that a little bit more. But before we do, you mentioned 16 years as well. So I'm curious to know, why 16 years? Was there a tipping point in your own life to make you embrace this work more?
Yeah. Well, The reason I entered psychology as a field was to heal my own traumas first. And I have explored every healing technique known to man, woman, and extraterrestrials, and plants and everything. But having done that in a search for what is the most graceful, most elegant way, most loving way for us to heal, there must be better ways. And so through my own healing, I've always been in search of that. And I've been lucky enough to experience EFT tapping, which we'll get into. But also in 2003, after a near-death experience, I asked, what was the next level of healing I could bring to the world? And this formula came through called the grace process. And it came through in deep meditation, and of course I'll explain more about it. But I remember thinking, seriously, you're giving me a formula? How is a formula going to help heal people? But for the last 16 years, I've been in the research of this formula along with tapping. And several years later, I was given the opportunity to do this humanitarian work. And I have taken EFT tapping and the grace process around the world to really good, solid results that allow people to experience that they have everything they need inside of themselves, and that we truly are expressions of love and divine. And I don't think there's ever been a time on the planet where more people are just stepping into the river of this acknowledgement, if that makes sense. It feels like we've come, even though there's so much chaos, people are hearing it differently. People are ready. They know there's going to be something beyond the current status quo to support us moving forward.
I believe so, yes. I have to ask you, what happened with your near-death experience?
Again, how much time do we have? No. So every year I set an intention, what's next on my soul purpose? And in 2003, I set an intention to heal with the sacred masculine. Guy, doesn't that sound so metaphysical? And I mean, I laugh about that because I thought, given some of the traumas in my life, that I would be hanging out in the arms of God in meditation and just really hearing and feeling all those loving things that I felt I needed to hear. And instead, in the space of 12 weeks, I faced chauvinism in my life, in my marriage, in the legal system, in the medical system. The caution is be careful what you ask for. Because what does it mean to heal with the sacred masculine? What did I have to face in myself? I had to face the chauvinism in myself, the opposite of sacred masculine. And my definition of chauvinism has nothing to do with gender. It's simply a sense of domination, a sense of competition, a sense of, or self-abandonment, or not acknowledging who we are, playing victim and martyr. So there's two sides to the same coin. But I had to look at what are the ways that I was abandoning myself in my personal life. And then in the space of 12 weeks, I left my home, my marriage. I had 2 emergency surgeries and a near-death experience in which I received, after a month in the hospital, really dying, losing 20% of my body weight in the middle of the night, receiving a message that everything in life is a choice, including taking the next breath. And I remember being quite astonished by that because I was very spiritual, and I felt very connected even in those moments of despair. And then I realized, wow, what if I just didn't take the next breath? Is that a choice? Is that a human choice? So I stopped taking the next breath. And I was, that whole near-death experience, you know, what you experience above your body, contemplating, feeling out of pain for the first time in a month, really floating into, you know, total love and all of that. And then I was in a hospital room, and on the other side of the hospital bed, on the curtain, 3 a.m, my 82-year-old roommate says out loud at 3 a.m, as I'm having my near-death experience, "Dear God, please help my roommate. She's really, really sick." And I remember hanging off the bed, not taking a breath, feeling very good, and then actually laughing, like having a laugh. And that sucked the air back into my lungs. And I started breathing again because I thought, well, I guess the divine is not done with me yet. However, once I got back in my body, I was racked with pain again. And I said, what the have I done? The next morning, I received another message without going into the details at the moment. But the message really was, if there was ever a time to receive, this would be it. And I realized in that moment that my trauma had led me to block love and to be afraid of receiving love, because love always got me in trouble. Like, well, what was supposed to be love. My abuse, my trauma as a child came from being seen in a way that wasn't safe. But the message at this point in 2003 was, receiving can be safe. And in this next part of your life, it's going to be important. And well, there's so many stories after that. But then I asked in meditation for the next level of my healing work to come in. I received the grace process, which is a formula, which you can talk about. But receiving is key, safe receiving. And how many of us who are givers aren't very good at receiving. But if we don't know how to receive, we will never know the value of our giving. Does that make any sense?
Totally, 100%. And it's funny that you say that, because the more I lean into this work and work with more people and grow here, the more I have to grow myself and allow that receiving, as well as that innate part of wanting to give all the time. But I have noticed in that wanting to give all the time, it can almost be an avoidance of looking at myself more.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that's why my favorite symbol is the infinity circuit. And I believe that, you know, in the work that I do as a therapist, there appears to be a giver and there appears to be a receiver. But when we meet in the sweet spot in the middle, there's only love, and we're all transformed. And so I come to every work, every session, every retreat, every anything, knowing that I will receive something. And so it makes it a balance. And so then we're all equal partners. And when we're equal partners, especially when we think about humanitarian work and when we think about anything, if we don't go into that realizing we are equal partners, it falls short. It falls short. And it becomes an aberration sometimes, and even worse. You know, obviously Australia has its own history, as the United States does, in these situations of injustice, which is, you know, exploding through the world right now. But when we understand that we're equal, like, wow, it's a whole different way to.
You see everyone differently, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a few things that are just flying through my mind right now, and I'm like, okay, there's so many directions here. But something I think I want to clarify is around trauma, because I know you've worked with many people that have had physical trauma. You know, something physically happened to them. Then there's emotional trauma as well, and then there's that point you say in your own journey you didn't know how to receive love, and so I'm what are the correlations? I don't even know how I'm going to get this question up, but what are the correlations of the different kinds of trauma that we have that actually affect the disease of our body, and that the manifestation of what comes out in our body. Because I think in the Western mind especially, we see things in isolation. We repair and fix this if this is broken down, and we don't tend to go back to the root cause or give it acknowledgement. So I'd love to hear your take on all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So my first book, The Stress Management Handbook, really was a result of my dissertation on psychoneuroimmunology, which is a big word for the mind-body-spirit stress connection. So back in the 1990s, I reviewed all the research on this, how trauma and stress affects the immune system and in general. All the research still remains definitive today, except that what's missing in today's the public understanding of trauma and stress is the fact that it is a brain-based issue. Trauma and stress create a brain-based dysfunction. And so whether it's physical trauma or emotional trauma or spiritual trauma, it creates a dysfunction in the brain between the amygdala and the hippocampus, which is the smoke detector in the brain that says whether we should go on alert and defend ourselves or whether we are safe. That disconnects us from this heart-brain connection we have, which has been studied by the Heart Math Institute for the past 30 years. And I'll come back to that. But I think what would really help people to understand is that there are 4 conditions for trauma, or 4 characteristics. The first one is something unexpected or shocking. The second is a feeling of being completely isolated and alone. I'm the only one having this experience. The third is a sense of feeling that there's a perceived or real threat of death. And the fourth is that I'm trapped, it's hopeless, there's no way out. And if we look at, just look at our listeners today, if you just look at COVID-19 is the collective trauma right now. All 4 of those conditions exist in COVID. So what happens when one of our traumas are triggered? It tends to trigger a lot of our other traumas, whether little traumas or big traumas from childhood through adulthood. So we're seeing now, so then as the amygdala and the hippocampus are not communicating well, it's triggering the flow of stress hormones into the body, cortisol, steroids, adrenaline. The body becomes hyper attenuated to those hormones, and the immune system starts to break down. And if you have any tendency to back pain or stomach pain or headaches or whatever your kind of illness, whatever your symptoms are going to get exacerbated by those circumstances. So now we have COVID. We also have, this massive social injustice issue. We've got politics. Dare I go there? That's another workshop. But there's just so much happening, and our personal freedoms and our economic sustainability, all of that is being totally impacted. So it's very important for people to understand that we're all under some trauma at this point. But we must deal with this with somatic releases, because up to now, the biggest thing we have is cognitive behavioral therapy or, as you and I were talking before the broadcast, traditional medicine, which is focused on symptom relief versus holistic mind, body, spirit, organic, functional medicine, which is now beginning to emerge.
Yeah, there's a loop I want to close for the listeners in there as well, and that's somatic release. I thought maybe you could touch on that, because I heard you speak as well about, because of your existing background, about words. Just speaking doesn't necessarily relieve the trauma. And so I thought it would be nice to tie those in, just to close that loop.
Thank you very much. So, look, cognitive behavioral therapy gives people a lovely opportunity to be seen and heard. However, every time we tell our stories, the brain thinks we're experiencing it again. So if there is no somatic release during our storytelling, we are literally re-traumatizing ourselves. So people will say, well, what does that mean, somatic release? So that means that if it's all about the hormones, then we have to have a technique and therapy that approaches the release of hormones and the regulation of hormones and the regulation of immunity. I understand you have a background in functional medicine and supplements, and all of that is part of it, that we must regulate our diet. Like, it's all about natural supports. So now let's add to that natural support. There are probably 4 or 5 somatic release techniques that have been thoroughly vetted and researched over the years. And EFT tapping is one of them, emotional freedom techniques. And I partner with the leading researcher in EFT, who happens to be an Aussie, Dr. Peter Stapleton from Bond Uni. How does that happen? So she's brought this field forward, in so many ways, and beautiful website that people can see and download lots of resources. But what's important is what we do in EFT is we actually stimulate acupressure points as we introduce the therapy and the techniques, so that it's all about physiological regulation. So if I'm really hijacked, if we came to this conversation and I was really, really nervous about having this interview, I want my physiology to relax so that you and I can engage in the highest form of conversation. So literally with EFT, there are ways that we can bring our minds and hearts and bodies back to balance in 5 minutes. And certainly if it's a trauma, more, a lot longer. It's not a magical thing, but when I feel more peaceful in my heart and my brain and my body, I am available for transformation. I'm available for learning and transformation. And so that's why talk therapy alone, without a somatic release, leaves us more tied up, leaves us with more adrenaline, more cortisol pumping through our bodies, and we leave feeling worse. Or if we might feel better a short period of time, it doesn't last because it's a palliative effect, and then the hormonal system goes back into that trauma response. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that we're over time rebalancing the body to a new homeostasis? Would that be fair to say?
Well, not even a new homeostasis. Well, I think every time we interrupt. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Well, and both are true. Every time we reset, we do give the body an opportunity to be even more resilient. But if we're constantly in resetting mode, that might be difficult. So, for example, early in my career, I dealt with people who had physiological illnesses and diseases, who were, because of a holistic approach, were able to rebalance and reset their immune systems. And doctors who said that their conditions were uncurable, because they don't have the training in medical school. They just don't have the opportunities to understand what you and I have been able to study all these years. And my clients were going back to their physicians, and they were able to get off their blood pressure medication, their tumors went away, heart diseases started to rebalance. Now, I wasn't doing any magic. It was simply love, trauma healing, functional medicine, all like a basic reset of a lifestyle. And the doctors could only say, that was spontaneous remission.
Mm.
And when my clients wanted to say, but I'm meditating and I'm eating healthy and I'm doing this thing, this trauma healing thing, they're like, yeah, no, not so much. But we know now, so many years later, that this is the future. This is the present. These are the lifestyle changes we have to make to be more in communion with ourselves and to honor our that we have the power inside, especially if we have a loving presence to work with, as a coach or a consultant or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I interviewed I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but you should definitely check him out. It's Dr. Jeffrey Rediger. He recently released a book called Cured: The Science of Spontaneous Healing, because he spent 18 years studying it while he was still working at the hospital. And he just mentioned, dive deep into all the things you just mentioned. Like it's showing up everywhere. I'm intrigued as well I want to talk a little bit about Rwanda and what you experienced there, because like you said, you put yourself in a position where you would have seen, I can't even imagine what you would have witnessed there. Would you mind talking to that a bit? Because I think it'd be great to give reference to how powerful and what this work can actually do to support people.
Well, I mean, first of all, I've had a love affair with Rwanda since 2007. I thought I was going to have a love affair with a man, but I got a country. So I went with it. But as I mentioned earlier, just preparing my preparation was the most important thing, because I knew that I had my PhD and my MBA and all of my academics and my books and all of that stuff. But I knew that there was something deeper that I had to do. So that I could be fully present to what I was going to be seeing and witnessing. So I read everything I possibly could, and I spent 3 months deeply looking into my ego and transcending my ego. Could I be fully present to someone who had murdered 100 people? Could I be fully present to a woman whose entire family was violently massacred in front of her, and she raped and left to live with AIDS? Could I be in front of orphan head of households who were 6 to 8 years old at the time of the genocide and left to raise 2 to 6 other children? Could I be fully present to that? Because I also know that, so many of us who are helpers, we really want to help, we want to volunteer, but in many circumstances, which, we'll talk about my work in Australia as well, we end up taking care of the volunteers because they haven't done the internal work, because they're looking for some other fix for their woundedness. Now, that sounds a little harsh, and I'm not saying everyone is in that circumstance, but I'm just inviting people to be really diligent. Have you healed your own trauma enough to be fully present to someone else's? And I'll just tell a little story if we have time.
Please. Yeah.
That the answer to all of this was so apparent, because after all those months of doing that work, I was in Rwanda for about 5 weeks. And for the first 2 weeks, we just went and visited and enculturated ourselves. We went to the genocide museums. We visited in communities. I didn't speak very much. I didn't try to do my work. I just realized that I needed to know more about the people and the country that I was going to work in. And 13 years after the genocide, there was no mental health in the country, except for cathartic church experiences, where the notion was that if you catharted your story over hours long period of time, that you would become exhausted and heal yourself from telling the story. Well, that's a whole other thing, because basically that just screws with your hormonal system, and the adrenaline system gets overloaded, and you become numb to the story, but you don't become resilient to it, which is what EFT and the grace process help us do. But anyway, I was at this 3-hour church service, only white chick in the room. Not a lot of happiness for white people, understandably so. No translator, everything in Kinyarwanda, which is the language of Rwanda. After 3 hours of people kind of looking at me like, what's she doing here? At the end of the service, about a dozen elderly Rwandan women circled me. It was very clear that they were living with wounds from the genocide. They were living clearly with amputations and scars, and it was very also clear that they were living with AIDS. And in that moment, I had nothing. I didn't have a translator. I have no money. I have no medical supplies. I have no food. There's nothing that I can offer. And of these dozen women who surrounded me, one woman stepped forward and she took down her shirt and she showed me her chest, which had been mutilated clearly by some form of violence. And in that moment, if I had not done all the work I had done to be fully present, I think I would have just capitulated into a pile of mush or tears. But instead, this moment of grace came over me, and I put my hand to her chest, and I took her hand and put it to my chest. And we just gazed into each other's eyes. And there was nothing except connectedness. There was no separation. And then when the moment passed, we dropped our hands. And I was not aware of anything except that we had seen each other, that we were complete with each other in that moment. Now that sounds kind of crazy given everything that had gone on and what this woman had experienced. But the whole room was affected by this moment of connectedness. No words, presence. There was presence. And I don't know what this woman received from that, but I know that I received, that I was enough in that moment if I was present. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of other work to be done, but because I could feel complete in that moment, in presence to another human being, then I had the resilience to think about what was possible. And, well, that was in 2007. I said I was only going one time. 17 times later, but that is seminal to my message, to my experience, to what I'm trying to teach as many people who will want to learn being fully present to another human being without any agenda, with no contraction, if that makes sense.
Totally. My gosh. Sorry, you're the second person to make me cry on a podcast. You realize that, don't you? That was beautiful. Thank you much. Thank you for sharing that. When you think of what's going on in the world, it's the one thing we lack. We have those deep connections. We don't even have those deep connections to ourselves either. You know, and it's so powerful. It's so healing. Even on my own journey, that's where, you know, why I'm so passionate about this work and be able to bring people. But we're not even aware of it half the time. You know.
And isn't it amazing? Again, I know that many people are suffering during this time. I know that it is grabbing us all in our essential wounding and our fear of survival and fear of not having enough. And yet, the most beautiful miracles coming from this are people searching, reaching even more deeply to find out what's important, how much is enough, and if I have more, will I offer it to someone else? Or if I have something that somebody needs, is there a way for us to do that? And is there a way for us in a world where we are all being affected? I've waited my whole life for the world to be focused on one thing so that we have the opportunity for global healing. We are all faced with our mortality, we're all faced with our health and our sustainability. The world will change, the world is changing. So we have a choice to make. How will we respond to that? Will we resist it? Will we contract? Will we move into fear and paranoia and hoarding? Or will we open our hearts and join together and see our connectedness with the whole world? It's an exciting time, even through the contractions, if we allow our hearts to open just a bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think we should touch on the grace process. That would be a nice place to pivot to. Can you break it down for us a little bit?
Yes. So in these meditations, as I said, I always have to try on everything myself, right? So get this formula in meditation. I'm like, seriously? So for the last 16 years, I've gone in search of the evidence that it's true. And Greg Braden's work with the Divine Matrix, Joseph Chilton Pierce with the Biology of Transcendence, David Hawkins, so many other people. Now, clearly the research supports this work. So very quickly, it's a simple formula, but the practice and the integration of it takes a little time. So we start with choice. What is it that we're choosing to heal? Or what is it that we're choosing to receive? And then we look at, what are the judgments I have about that choice that I'm making? What judgments of myself, another person, a circumstance, or even the divine? So if I say, oh, I want to bring in my spiritual romantic partner, like, what are my judgments around that? You know, I'm too old. It's been too long. I haven't had good luck with that. Whatever. Those are the judgments of myself. Judgments of other people. Well, my parents told me it was supposed to look like this. Or my relationship, the people I've been in relationship with did this. Or the circumstance did that. Or the divine has not blessed me with this. Then we look at what needs forgiveness in order for us to receive what we want. Again, forgiveness of myself, another person, the circumstances, and the divine. And forgiveness is the fulcrum, right? So when we withhold forgiveness and we are attached to our judgments, we can't receive. Because we're saying, that's the what I call the ego. That's where the ego resides, edging God out. So the ego is not a bad thing. It's simply the thing that we came into this life with that would help us navigate separation from the divine into living our divine purpose. So I think we have to make friends with our ego, but if I am holding on to I can't hold on to my judgments and unforgiveness and still receive what I want, because I'm saying that my grief and my trauma are more important than what I really want to receive. So once I deal with the ego piece, that opens me to live in my heart. And the highest human resonances of our hearts are the energy of gratitude, love, joy, and wonder. And I would just ask people to and I'll offer some resources also, but if everyone does a rage of gratitude every day, just notice how gratitude gives rise to the energy of love. And then when we're in gratitude and love, some spark of joy may want to emerge. And if joy is elusive, wonder can come from that. The wonder that our healing is unfolding, the wonder that there are gifts and miracles supporting us in our healing when we've dropped our judgments and open to forgiveness. And then our focus can be more about that. And then we meet the divine in the field of the divine, because what is that? We meet God in love, whatever you call the divine. And when we meet the divine in gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, everything is possible. And grace drops in instantaneously. And by grace, I often tend to forget to even talk about what the definition of grace is, because I feel like everybody knows it. But it's just that transcendent feeling of oneness where everything drops away, whether it's in nature or on an elevator looking at somebody or with a child or whatever experience is. It's just that notion that all is well, peace and understanding and connectedness. And why wouldn't, so here's my question around that. I ask people, so how long do you want to hang out in your suffer and struggle and your grief and trauma? And how quickly do you want to move into gratitude, love, joy, and wonder? Let me think. How do I want to bring my healing in? Do I want to do it in suffer and struggle, or do I want to do it in with a sense of humor, a sense of humanness, and a sense of wonder?
Yeah, beautiful. It there's always with people, and I'm just speaking for the listeners here as well, that because our feelings are how we interpret the world, you know, and we the way we feel, and we meet our perceptions in that feeling, it can be very difficult to feel like there is other ways beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep resorting back to those judgments, to those stories, to the like you say, the holding on. With this process, what would it be fair to say then it's a practice, that there's something that you comes in daily, and then you know, like I always think about these things like moving a great big ship line slowly, and then it's just the trajectory seems small, but you end up in a completely new destination.
Yes. Well, a couple of things there, because uh, my lens is that the thing that trauma is the thing that holds us back from having healthy emotions. So if I have a trauma of feeling isolated or all alone, or no one has ever understood me, or I'm the only one in the world who could never experience this. These are essential traumas related to those wounds of separation. And until we deal with that, there's always going to be a little grab on, or there's going to be a weight on what we're experiencing in the present. And so if I have patterns, so what I do in my private practice I work with influencers, I work with leaders, I work with people who want to have a big influence in the world. And I work with people who realize that they still have some wounding that's holding them back. They've done a lot of work on themselves, but there's still something that keeps them in old patterns. And we connect what's happening in the present with the old wound, the original wound, and then we release it somatically so that it's no longer part of the physiology. And so then you can't run the same story anymore. I talk a lot about our ego stories. And if I have a story about the fact that, I can't get a date, I got to change that story. And so I go into that and see what that's all about. It seems really simple, right, on the surface, but whoa, pull lots of stuff. So same thing with illnesses and symptoms, people will say to me, I've had back surgery, or I have all these different things. And they're like, I saw the x-rays, I saw the brain scan, I saw the MRI. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's just some kind of device that's trying to measure something that we don't know the whole thing about. And I always go back to what was happening at the time that the symptom arose. What was your earliest memory of feeling that way? We always go back to the origin of what the physical symptom was in the moment, and it's magic. It's not magic. I mean, it's part of the whole heart, brain, body connection. But people they're like, oh no, that can't be true. I saw the x-ray of my back. I'm like, well, how come we just did 3 sessions and you don't feel any pain anymore? So I say that because I want to invite people into the empowerment that we all have, all the tools we need right inside of us. But we also, even I, need people to hold space for me when I've come up against an edge that happens to be so triggering for me that I might need somebody else to hold space for me. But it's being willing to be authentic and vulnerable, and also to laugh. Oh, guess what, Lori? I couldn't figure this out myself. Oh, you might have to ask for help, and you might have to receive it.
Yeah, beautiful. And then once the charge is not there, isn't it? It's amazing how quickly we forget as well. It's like, oh, I haven't noticed because I'm not noticing it anymore. You know, I
and
think
that's actually. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think there was a term I came up on the podcast before, apex, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
The apex effect is that you don't remember that you ever even had the issue. And I was just going to comment that the evidence of forgiveness is that there's absolutely no contraction. It's like, oh, that happened, but yeah, I don't have any emotional relation. I've learned from it. Doesn't mean I've tapped out the problem, but I've learned boundaries, and I've also learned, without the emotional or hijacking, is that I can bring myself fully present without the physiology hijacking me.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to ask you a few questions, Laurie.
Sure.
The first one is that what do you do in your personal life to maintain yourself with the highs and lows of life that we all get? You know, have you got any practices or things that are like non-negotiable for you?
Well, I think we cued into them already. EFT and the grace process. But I'll tell you, embodiment, if there's one word that the whole world needs to understand right now in spiritual practice, it is embodiment. So I meditate every morning. Well, most of the time. I journal. I do the grace process. I do tapping when it's necessary. And it's become such a physiological regulation that I know, instead of understanding when I'm not hijacked, I just understand, oh my gosh, my body is fairly in tune that the moment I'm holding my breath or the moment I'm getting hijacked, I know to stop everything, turn off everything. And if all you can do is simply say, gotta go to the bathroom, because nobody can argue with that, and get yourself quiet for a minute and come back. But seriously, my biggest thing is embodiment, which is you can take all the Himalayan salt baths, you can go to get your massage, you can go to the spa, you can do your yoga every day, you can do your meditations. But if you get out of those experiences and you kick the cat or yell at the whoever, that's not embodiment. Embodiment is when you're like seriously able to be fully present no matter what's going on. That's, to me, if if a critical mass of people in the world can do that, and it won't take many, we can hold space for whatever needs to happen in this time of uncertainty, in this time when so many things seem to be deconstructing. We must choose to be fully present.
Totally, totally. And it takes courage to do that. A lot of
That's
courage.
a whole nother workshop.
I know. If you could have dinner with anyone this evening from any time frame, anywhere in the world, who do you think it would be? It could be multiple people on there if you want.
I know this is going to sound whatever, but Guy, I think our conversation is deeply satisfying and expansive, and like, it's not about celebrity. It's not about it's the time is okay. We need authentic leadership, and it needs to be horizontal. We need to understand that the first people we need to lead is ourselves, and that we are all leaders. And so there's many people that I've actually had the immense pleasure and honor to meet and have conversations with. But it's in these exchanges, moment by moment, meaning by meaning, that's, to me, that's the satisfaction, that's the beauty of what I've been able to do in the world, that leads me to have these conversations with people like yourself. So it's not about somebody out there, it's about right here, what's happening right here.
In this moment. Yeah, beautiful. It's interesting, like I've been podcasting this podcast for 2 years now, and it's continually growing. Like the people are hungry for these conversations, and they need to be heard, and they need to be part of it. And I love the fact that it feels like give people a chance to almost feel like they're at the coffee table with us right now, and listening in, you know.
We are all part of the coffee table. No one can be left out anymore. We are all part of the possible. There is not one person among us in the whole planet that is not part of the possible if we open our hearts.
Totally. Last question. With everything we've covered today, what would you like to leave all the listeners to ponder on?
I want them to understand that whatever we choose to heal in ourselves creates a resonance field for that healing to unfold in our world. So that when I choose to heal something in myself, that is the greatest service work I can be doing in the world. Because if I can imagine, if I can forgive those who have betrayed me or hurt me, if I can choose healing, and that creates an ease in the world for other people to step into that healing, then my greatest work in the world is to do my own work first.
Beautiful. And everybody, where can I send them?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's some free resources at LoriLeyden.com, LoriLeyden.com. My humanitarian work is on createglobalhealing.org, where people can also watch our full-length documentary for free and see this humanitarian work that has unfolded now and is now in work in Australia, in Aboriginal and refugee communities. And it's only because of COVID that I'm not there right now. But that's a whole other thing. We're going online. We're working to do that online. So we just invite every heart to be involved, inspired to simply take care of yourself first.
Yeah, beautiful, Lori. And everyone, if you press pause and scroll down, the links and the show notes and the references and the people that have been mentioned today will all be below in this podcast as well. So it'll all be there for you. And Laurie, I just want to thank you for coming on here and just talking so beautifully and sharing with an open heart and everything that you're doing in the world. It truly is inspiring. And hopefully people, I have no doubt, actually, not hopefully, I have no doubt people will be inspired by listening to what you had to share with us today. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Guy. Honestly, it's been delightful.
Amazing.